Hey everybody, have you ever felt lost in the sea of audio gear, wondering which device is actually best for your podcast, your YouTube channel, or your live stream? Don't worry, you're not alone. And today, I'm going to break down the top audio interfaces, podcast mixers, and portable recorders in order to help you find your perfect fit or match for your situation. As I'm editing this, I've realized I need to talk about expectations. I've seen so many people over the last few years, they buy equipment with the idea that it will just make themselves sound better. With the exception of some of the devices I'm talking about, and really those are the ones that offer real-time audio processing, none of these devices are really going to improve your end result unless you're coming from using something like your laptop mic or some other no-name, low-quality device. Switching from a condenser mic to a dynamic in an untreated room will have more impact on your audio quality. Treating your acoustics will have a bigger impact than a mic, interface, or mixer will. And many podcasters they'll talk about how much their audio has improved when they switch to the Rodecaster and Shure SM7B, but what they don't tell you is that most of them switched from something like a Blue Yeti in an untreated room or a laptop in an untreated room. And the reality is they would have found the same results by switching to a dynamic mic by itself. First things first, let's talk about the three main types of audio devices out there. We've got audio interfaces. These are the most common types of devices you'll find. These are devices that connect to your computer with either USB or Thunderbolt, and they basically allow you to connect multiple XLR mics to your computer. When using an audio interface, you'll need to use your computer for recording, as well as some kind of software that will do the actual recording from what the audio interface sends it in terms of the audio. Next, we've got podcast mixers. These are designed for podcasting workflows. They offer multiple inputs for in-person guests, onboard sound effects, and easy-to-use controls. They should not be confused with traditional mixers, which they tend to lack the ability to record each mic to its own individual track. And podcast mixers, they can kind of blur the lines between audio interfaces and portable recorders because they tend to have higher quality preamps, but are still capable of recording without a computer. And last, we've got portable recorders. These are perfect for capturing audio on the go, whether you're interviewing someone on location or you just need a small setup that you can throw in a suitcase or backpack when you travel. Before we start, I want to take a moment to talk about the one thing that matters most when choosing what device to get, and that's how many mics do you need to record? The answer to this question is going to really help guide you in your search for finding that right device, and it'll let you know which devices will or will not work for you. You'll need to ensure that the devices you're looking at will have enough channels or XLR inputs or preamp channels to accommodate the number of mics you'll need to record. It can be confusing because those terms can be used kind of interchangeably depending on the manufacturer. So sometimes you might see it listed as an audio interface with 2 channels. You might see it listed as 2 preamps, maybe 2 XLR inputs or 2 XLR preamps. So it can be a little challenging to find that, but you can usually tell how many preamps are being used. So just look at a picture and count how many of these ports you see that are marked as inputs. So if you're using two mics, basically one for you and one for an in-person co-host or an in-person guest, you'll need something with two preamps. All of the devices we're talking about work with XLR ports or mics that have XLR ports on them. Some USB mics have USB and XLR. Those will work. If you have a USB mic that only has a USB port, it's not going to work with any of these devices. And if you need multiple microphones, you're just going to have to go out and buy some XLR mics because you can't easily or reliably connect multiple USB mics to a computer. So that's why I always recommend, if you need more than one mic, go to XLR and some form of audio interface, recorder, or podcast mixer. And one last thing before we get started. I want to provide a quick cheat sheet about some of the specs we're going to talk about in this section so you don't kind of get lost as we're talking about them. Sample rate and bit depth. Think of these as the resolution of your audio. Aim for 24-bit and 44.1 or 48K for best quality. But if you're working with video, stick with 24-bit 48K, and I'll talk about why in a few minutes. XLR preamps. These are essential for connecting XLR mics. Consider how many you need based on your recording setup. Headphone ports, pretty self-explanatory. These are there to ensure that everyone can monitor or hear their audio clearly. The more headphone ports you have, the easier it will be for everybody to hear themselves. Battery power and memory card recording. These are crucial for portability and on-location recording. Loopback and mix minus. They're essential for live streamers and podcasters or anyone who's trying to integrate audio from their computers. So if you've ever tried to play a YouTube video or music to someone on Zoom and they don't hear it, it's because you don't have loopback set up. So now that we've talked about a little bit of the definitions, let's dive into these different devices. These are the simplest of our options, and it's what many of us started with. They also tend to lack some of the features that other devices offer, like touchpads, faders, and portability. Depending on the model, they will connect to your computer through USB or a Thunderbolt cable. Some examples. We've got the Focusrite Vocaster. This interface is tailor-made for podcasters. It offers good preamps and versatile connectivity options like Bluetooth and a phone input and user-friendly mixing software that includes the loopback and everything that you need to be able to do a live stream, send audio from your computer out to the public, whatever it is. Even though its list price is a bit pricier than some of the competitors, it's been found regularly with steep discounts. I got my Vocaster 2 for $99. It's been that price most of the year, it seems like, and with Black Friday right now, the prices are back down to $99 for the Vocaster 2 and $50 for the Vocaster 1. And if you can find one on sale, you can't beat it for the price. And the difference between a Vocaster 1 and a Vocaster 2 is, as the name would indicate, the Vocaster 1 has one preamp, the Vocaster 2 has two preamps. So as simple as that. The preamps on the Vocasters include 70 dB of gain, so it should have more than enough gain for something like the SM7B. It has two headphone outputs, or at least the Vocaster 2 does. The Vocaster 1 would have one headphone output. They both have Bluetooth connectivity, a 3.5 millimeter phone input and output, and kind of a nice touch is a 3.5mm camera output. So you could, in theory, output the audio from your Vocaster into an audio input on your camera. I don't usually recommend working this way, but if you want to send your audio directly into your camera while also recording locally to a DAW, that's fine. That's how I would do it, because the preamps on cameras are notoriously bad. So I'd rather have good audio recorded in my DAW, just so I don't have to worry about the preamps on the cameras. Next up, we have another Focusrite product. This is the one most people are familiar with, and that's the 2i2. The 2i2 is suitable for both podcasters and musicians. The Vocaster, it's 100% built for podcasters. But the 2i2 has some features for music that might not be terribly useful for podcasters. Like air mode, that just adds presence. Usually that's not what we want to be doing with spoken word. However, the flip side of that is the 2i2 does lack some of the podcast-specific features that the Vocaster has. So the 2i2 generally costs $199. The preamps have 69 dB of gain. They have 2 instrument inputs. You've got the air mode with presence and harmonic drive options. Again, not really useful for podcasters. I have a video where I review the Vocaster 2 and do a deeper comparison with the 2i2, which I'll link to in the description below. Next up, we have the Motu M2, M4, and M6 interfaces. These interfaces are good quality, and I've been using them off and on over the last 20 years, and I'm a big Motu fan. I haven't had any issues with them or their drivers, and I would take one of their interfaces over the Focusrite 2i2 any day. The M2 and M4 both have 2 mic inputs. I know it's a little bit confusing. And the M6 has 4 inputs. And another feature for musicians is the Motus have MIDI in and out. Now, let's move on to the podcast mixers. And before we start, let's just talk about how not all mixers are created equally, which is why I refer to the devices I'm going to talk about as podcast mixers, or I guess more specifically, they're mixers built for podcasting. One of the key differences is that all podcast mixers will allow you to record each mic to its own individual track. And this is essential for high quality audio because it allows us to treat each track individually, depending on what is needed. Most mixers, they're built for music or live sound, and their goal in general is to take all of the mics that are connected to them and mix them down into one stereo track. This is not ideal for podcasting because if we're recording 4 mics, we end up with one track with all 4 of them mixed together. And again, we lose that ability to treat the tracks individually. So the one everybody knows of is the Rodecaster Pro. This is kind of looked at as the de facto podcast mixer. It's the one everybody seems to have and recommends, but it's not the only one out there, and we'll talk about some others in a minute. It is an investment, but it is a powerhouse for serious podcasters. It lists for $699. It has 4 mic inputs. It's got 6 programmable sound pads, built-in audio processing in the forms of compression, noise gate, EQ. It's got a touchscreen interface for easy control, as well as physical faders and knobs. We've got the Rodecaster Duo, which is a cut-down version of the Pro 2. Basically, it's a 2-channel version of the Rodecaster Pro. Everything else is pretty much the same. It functions the same, has the same controls. It does list for $499, and like I said, it's got all the same stuff that the Rodecaster Pro does. Mackie DLZ Creator and DLZ Creator XS. These mixers are probably the most direct competitor to the Rodecaster Pro 2 and the Duo. They tend to be less talked about because, let's face it, Rode was the first one to market with the Rodecaster, so they built the following. The Mackie, though, it takes a little bit of a different approach, and it can be easier for newbies because they offer an easy mode to help guide you through everything and to simplify. The full-sized Creator DLZ, it's going to be taller or longer, deeper, however you want to look at it, than the Rodecaster, so be aware of that if you have limited desk space. It's also worth noting that in 2024, Rode did purchase Mackie, so it will be interesting to see how things go with that. I'm curious to see if any of Mackie's technology works its way into the Rodecasters or vice versa, because there's a lot of similarities, but I'm sure there are some areas where Mackie might be able to make the Rodecaster a better product, and there might be some ways in which Rode can make the DLZ creators a better product. Or it might be a situation where both companies do their thing independent of each other, and only time will tell. So the prices for the DLZ creators is $799 for the full-priced one and $499 for the XS. They include either 4 mic inputs or 2, and have built-in audio processing in the forms of, again, compressor, noise gate, EQ, so all of the basics are covered there. And it has wireless control via iOS or an Android app. Kind of the lesser-known alternative to these is the Tascam Mixcast 4. The Mixcast 4 comes in at $399. This mixer is designed for, again, podcasters and live streamers, and it offers the same thing as the others. 4 mic inputs, sound pads, built-in audio processing, and it's just another option for creators who are looking for some way to record 3 or 4 mics. It's sort of the just more affordable, lesser known, kind of maybe a mid-tier type product. I haven't used one or even seen one in person, so I can't really comment on how easy it is to use compared to the others, but here's a partial review from a B&H review that talks about the differences between the Mixcast 4 and the Rodecaster 2. And there's a lot to read here, so if you want, feel free to pause this video, but I don't want to make this section go on too long, so let's move on. The last category we're going to talk about are portable recorders. We have the Zoom H5, H6. These recorders they're known for their portability, and they're useful for on-location recording, interviews, but the big thing in my personal experience is the preamps are known to be on the noisy side. The Zoom H5 and H6 can usually be found, I think, between $200 and $300. The H6 or the H5 has 2 mic inputs, whereas the H6 has 4. But other than that, they're pretty close to being the same thing. Next up, we have the Zoom P4 and P8. These recorders were released by Zoom a couple of years ago to provide a kind of a budget line of equipment targeting podcasters, and they've become a favorite for those who are on tight budgets. The Zoom P8 I'd probably classify it more as a podcast mixer, but I put it here for a reason. And that's because I need to give a quick word about the P4 and P8. While they offer some some cool features. Zoom decided to cut corners to keep the cost low, and there's a limitation to 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz sample rate. 16-bit audio makes it more challenging to set your levels just right. This means you might have more noise than you'd like if you set the gain too low, or if you set it too high, you're going to clip and distort. This is much less of a problem when recording in 24 bits because we have just a wider dynamic range and more headroom. The other thing is using 44.1 with video, that can create sync headaches since video defaults to 48K. This can make the P4 and P8 less suitable for you if you're someone who is working with video podcasting or live streams. As such, I can't really recommend the P4 or P8 really to anybody. Zoom just really crippled these, I think, to hit a price point, making them really not the best choice for content creators. And to put things in perspective, the last interface I used that could only record in 16-bit 44.1 was my first interface 23 years ago. Every one I have seen since, I don't know, 2004-ish or so, have been capable of at least 24 48K. The other thing to be aware of is that with Zoom products, what you see is what you get. And what I mean by that is, compared to the Rodecasters and the DLZs, Zoom isn't known for making firmware updates. And that's how companies fix bugs and add new features. And I'm not saying that Zoom doesn't fix bugs, but they're not really known for adding new features. So that's another thing worth keeping in mind. Let me pause here for just a moment and ask that if you're getting value out of this video, that you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more of my content. Are you done? Okay, let's dive into the specific scenarios and see which device shines in each. Scenario 1, podcasting, solo or remote guests. The reality is that for a solo show or one where you interact with remote guests or a remote host, a USB XLR mic is more than enough. Getting a good USB mic like a Shure MV7 Plus will get you good quality recordings with a really stripped down setup. So that is usually my first recommendation for this kind of scenario. If you want to use an XLR mic, then an audio interface like the Vocaster 1 or 2, the Motu M2, or the Focusrite Solo or 2i2 will give you excellent sound quality and the essential features that you need. You can save a little bit of money by buying a one-channel interface like the Solo or even an Elgato Wave XLR, but do be aware that if you decide to add an in-person participant down the road, you'll need to invest in something with more inputs. Two-person podcast. This is where you have the most options because there are a number of two-channel audio interfaces and a couple of podcast mixers. For audio interfaces, we have the same players as above, like the Vocaster 2 and the Motu M2 and the Focusrite 2i2. Those are your budget options. You can also look at higher-end interfaces like the Universal Audio Volts and Apollo Solo and Twin. However, if you have the budget, the Rodecaster Duo or the Mackie DLZ Creator XS are great choices because they offer more hands-on controls for two hosts and a more seamless integration with your computer. Along with the Vocasters, the Rodecaster and the DLZ are the only ones that are built for podcasters. The biggest drawback to the Duo and DLZ XS are their size. While smaller than the larger counterparts, They are still larger than a typical 2-channel interface. 3 to 4 person podcast. This is where the Rodecaster Pro 2 and the Mackie DLZ Creator start to really shine. You can also consider the Tascam Mixcast 4 as a more budget-friendly alternative. These all feature the hands-on controls for easier adjustments to things like headphone and mic levels. You've got solo and mute buttons, as well as a screen to make it easier to set up and see what you're doing, especially if you're recording directly to the device out in the field where you don't have a computer that you're connected to. The other advantage they offer is a headphone port for each mic, so everyone can easily use headphones without the need for extra equipment, like a splitter or a headphone amp. There are some audio interfaces out there that can accommodate 3 to 4 people. Those would be the Motu M6, the Focusrite 18i16, and the 18i20. But they will require a headphone splitter or amp to be able to plug 4 people into headphones. 5+ person podcast. If you need more than 5 preamps, this pushes you back into the world of audio interfaces because, with the exception of the Zoom P8, there aren't any podcast mixers with more than 4 mic preamps. The closest thing that comes to mind is the Zoom L8, which includes 6 preamps and offers 2496 recording, so it's a better option than the Zoom P8. But in general, at this point, you're looking at either audio interfaces with 8 mic preamps or higher-end music mixers, which pushes the budget up quite a bit. If you do decide to look into mixers, the key thing to look for is that when it's connected to your computer over USB, that all of your inputs are available. Many cheaper mixers, they only transmit 2 channels over USB, or 2 inputs, which is not ideal if we're aiming for an enjoyable listening experience for the audience. Some audio interfaces you could look at are the Motu 8 Pre, the Tascam US 16x08 or 16x08, the Audient Evo 16, PreSonus Studio 1824C, or the PreSonus Quantum 2626. Scenario 2, live streaming. So loopback is the key here. You'll want a device that includes loopback. And if you're unfamiliar with loopback, it's what allows you to easily add music, sound effects, and other audio from your computer into your live stream without causing any kind of echoing or feeding back. The good news is that more and more companies are adding this functionality to their controller software. Some of the ones that I know that include loopback are the Rodecasters, the Mackie DLZs, the Focusrite Vocasters and Scarlett interfaces, the Lewitt Connect series, the Motu M series interfaces, the Elgato Wave XLR and their Stream Deck Plus with their XLR dock. Scenario 3, YouTube. This one really depends on where you tend to record. If you have a dedicated space for recording, an audio interface or podcast mixer will be your best choice here. But if you find yourself recording in various locations, you can find many different options depending on what you want to use for your microphone. But if you just need a portable recording rig that uses XLR mics, you'll want to use either a portable recorder or a podcast mixer. I'm not sure if any of the podcast mixers can be powered by alkaline batteries, but they should all be able to be powered by a power bank. That's what we use for battery power if we're on a longer video shoot. Power banks work very well for this. Another option, if you just need something simple is to use one of the newer wireless mic systems like the Rode Wireless Pro or the DJI Mic 2. These are dedicated recorders that feature onboard recording and built-in mics, or you have the option of using included lavs. And one more thought as I'm editing. In my videos, I try to be impartial and informative, but I've had some feedback from the audience asking for more opinions or advice on equipment. And let me note that as of right now, I don't have hands-on experience with everything I've mentioned in this video, but I do know enough about all of it to have a good idea of what to expect. I also have picked up a Rodecaster Duo, and I have a DLZ Creator XS on the way, so do expect some videos about those coming soon. And I'll add some links to the description once those videos have been published. And really, this is kind of what I would pick for the different situations we've been talking about. For a solo podcast, my pick would be the Shure MV7 Plus, because this is by far the best sounding USB mic I have heard. I would take this over an interface and mic combo just because it's fewer cables and takes up no desk space. If you want to use an XLR mic instead, I would look at the Vocaster 1 or even the Elgato options if you know you'll only ever need one mic. Otherwise, I'd probably look at the Vocaster 2 because it gives you that added flexibility if you do want to add an in-person co-host or guest, or even if one of the preamps goes bad, you have a backup. If I wanted to use an interface with my current mic and standalone preamp, I would have to go with the Mo2 M4 because it has the auxiliary inputs for connecting outboard gear. And that's something that a lot of the other devices we've talked about in this, they just don't have. For a two-person podcast, I'd probably lean towards the Rodecaster Duo or the DLZ Creator XS. They provide everything you need, and you have easier access to stuff like faders and knobs to make changes if you need to. So, like adjusting the headphone volume or mic levels. But if you don't have the budget or desk space for one of these, you can't go wrong with the Vocaster 2. For a 3 or 4 person podcast, I'd probably again opt for the Rodecaster or the DLZ Creator, and it's for the same reasons I just talked about. The one reason I might recommend an interface for you is if desk space is at a premium, because these mixers do take up a lot of space. And also, some of the larger interfaces, they can be racked up and moved out of the way, so it's not cluttering up your desk. For a 5-person podcast, well, I don't know that many people, so there's that. And I think that realistically, it would really kind of depend on the space you have, and if one of the participants is controlling everything, or if your show has someone who runs the mix for you. A mixer would be ideal, but these mixers, they do take up some space, so an interface may make more sense in situations where you're low on space. For live streams and YouTube, this one really comes down to needs and space. I think that for YouTube, I would probably choose either the Vocaster 1 or one of the Elgato options if I'm planning on making solo content or working with people remotely. They are simple, they're straightforward, and you're not paying for features you won't need. For live streams, though, I'd probably opt for the Duo or the DLZ XS, or I guess possibly the Elgato Stream Deck Plus with their XLR dock. One of the big benefits of the Stream Deck Plus is that you get extra controls and buttons that you can use to control your live stream. If desk space is at a premium, I'd opt for the Stream Deck Plus option or the Vocaster 1. Personally, I'd probably pick the Stream Deck over the Vocaster simply because it offers a lot more utility. They truly are flexible, and each person will find different ways that it can save them time and just kind of make things easier. I am glad that Rode came out with the Duo and Mackie came out with the XS, because I've seen way too many podcasters buying the full-sized Rodecasters and literally use it for their solo shows. I'm guessing they thought that it would help them sound better or because it looks cool, but they were paying for a lot of features, like 4 channels of preamps and all of that stuff, and they're using just a fraction of it. These smaller versions, they make more sense for most podcasters because the podcasters aren't shelling out for features they won't use, like, I don't know, preamps 3 and 4. Kind of a personal anecdote, of all the shows I've worked on, there's only been one that has had 2 people or more recording in person, and they used a Focusrite 2i2. When they moved on to a cheaper editor, they were on their 3rd 2i2, and we spent a lot of time troubleshooting headphones and their monitoring because it just seems like every time we'd start a Riverside session, they were having issues. I think part of it was because they were using a headphone splitter because the 2i2 only has one headphone port. And I'm not saying that the 2i2s aren't reliable, but I would have a difficult time recommending one after those experiences. And with the Vocaster 2 being discounted like it's on a closeout, I don't know why anybody wouldn't choose the Vocaster 2 over the 2i2. So to wrap up, there are a number of options here, but it really comes down to your budget and your use case. So what about you? What type of content do you create? Are you a podcaster? Do you do live streams? Are you a YouTuber? All of the above? None of the above? Let me know. What's your biggest audio recording challenge? Let me know in the comments below. And as usual, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.